I didn't lose my apartment in a fire. I didn't sign it away in a divorce. It was a property sold without permission, and the woman who did it was my own sister. I used to believe that kind of thing only happened in dramatic news stories, some messy family conflict you scroll past while drinking your morning coffee, a headline about home betrayal that feels distant and exaggerated. Until it was mine. My name is Claire. I'm 34. I work in healthcare administration. I'm not reckless. I'm not naive. And I definitely wasn't the type of person who would ever expect a property sold without permission to be part of my life story. The apartment wasn't luxurious. It was a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland. But it was mine. I bought it at 29. No cosigner, no help. Just overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and years of saying no to things I wanted. That apartment represented independence, stability, proof that I didn't need anyone to survive, especially not my family. My sister, Amanda, has always been different, charming, outgoing, effortlessly persuasive, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make strangers feel like lifelong friends, the kind of person who could also convince you that you misunderstood something you clearly heard. Growing up, she was the golden child. I was the responsible one. When our parents divorced, I handled paperwork. She handled tears. When bills were late, I found solutions. She found someone else to blame. Still, she was my sister, and when she hit a rough patch 2 years ago, messy breakup, job instability, maxed out credit cards, I did what older sisters do. I helped. It started small. She needed a temporary place to stay, just a few months. She needed to use my address to stabilize her mail. She needed access to some documents for a loan application. That was the first time I signed something that, looking back, I shouldn't have. She framed it as harmless, a technicality, a way to prove residency for refinancing debt. I trusted her because it was family. Because who expects home betrayal from someone who grew up in the same bedroom down the hall? At first, everything seemed normal. She paid me small amounts of rent, cooked dinner sometimes, acted grateful, even affectionate. But slowly, things began to shift. Mail started arriving addressed to both of us, official-looking envelopes, bank statements I didn't recognize. When I asked, she laughed it off. Just paperwork for consolidating my debt. Relax, Claire. Relax. That word would echo in my head months later when I realized my apartment, my safe place, had become the center of a family conflict I never saw coming. The tension wasn't loud. It was subtle. Whispers, avoided eye contact, documents moved from one drawer to another. And one afternoon, while I was at work, something happened that would turn my life into a case study of property sold without permission. But I didn't know that yet. I was still making dinner plans, still believing my home was waiting for me. If you've ever trusted someone completely, you know how dangerous that can be. And I had no idea I was standing at the edge of the worst home betrayal of my life. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no police at the door, just a phone call. I was in between meetings when an unknown number flashed on my screen. Normally, I let those go to voicemail, but something in my chest tightened and I answered. Hi, is this Claire Morrison? I'm calling regarding the final confirmation for the property transfer. Property transfer? I actually laughed. I think you have the wrong person. There was a pause, papers shuffling. No, ma'am, this is in reference to the condominium on Hawthorne Drive. My apartment. The rooms suddenly felt smaller. I'm not selling, I said slowly, carefully. Another pause. Ma'am, the documents were submitted last week. We're just confirming vacancy timeline. Submitted. Last week. I hung up before she could say anything else. When I got home, Amanda was on the couch, scrolling on her phone like nothing in the world was wrong. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have. Why would someone call me about a property transfer? Her thumb froze for half a second. Then she looked up and smiled, casual, calm. "Oh, that. I meant to tell you." My heart didn't race, it dropped. "Tell me what?" She sighed like I was being dramatic. "It's not what you think. I was exploring refinancing options. There was paperwork involved. It probably triggered some automated call." Refinancing. That word again. I stepped closer. "Did you sign anything?" She rolled her eyes. "Claire, relax. It's just paperwork. You signed things too, remember? When we adjusted ownership percentage for the loan application." Adjusted ownership percentage. I remembered signing something months ago. She'd said it was temporary, a way to show joint asset strength to secure better terms. I hadn't read every page. Because it was my sister. Because I trusted her. Because I never imagined a scenario involving a property sold without permission. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every document, every signature, every time she slid papers across the kitchen table with a reassuring smile. The next morning, I checked the county property records online. My name was still there, but so was hers. Joint tenancy, equal ownership. My stomach twisted. When I confronted her again, she turned defensive. "You said you wanted to help me rebuild. This is rebuilding." "By tying yourself to my apartment," she crossed her arms. "It's just temporary. Why are you making this a whole family conflict?" There it was, the shift. Suddenly, I was the unreasonable one. She started dropping comments like, "You always think the worst of me. I guess I can't rely on my own sister. You'd rather see me homeless?" It wasn't loud manipulation, it was subtle, layered, effective, and it worked, at least enough to make me doubt myself. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe the call was a mistake. Maybe this wasn't the beginning of home betrayal. But a week later, a realtor's business card showed up in our mailbox, addressed to Amanda. And that's when I realized this wasn't refinancing. This wasn't paperwork confusion. This was something else, something deliberate, something that felt dangerously close to a property sold without permission scenario. And for the first time, I stopped asking her questions and started looking for answers. I didn't confront her about the realtor's card. Not immediately. Instead, I did something I should have done months ago. I started reading. Every document I'd signed, every email she had forwarded, every scanned attachment sitting quietly in my inbox. And that's when I saw it. An addendum, buried in legal language. A clause that converted our temporary co-ownership adjustment into full joint authority, including the right for either party to initiate a sale, without additional consent. My hands went cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup. The next confirmation came 3 days later. I came home from work and noticed something small but wrong. The framed photo of my college graduation was gone from the hallway wall. 2 decorative lamps missing from the living room. When I asked, Amanda shrugged. "I'm decluttering. Makes the place easier to show." To show. The word echoed. "You're showing the apartment?" She didn't deny it this time. She didn't even look guilty. "There's an offer," she said, like we were discussing a used sofa. "It's actually a great deal, above market." I stared at her. "You're selling my home." "Our home," she corrected smoothly. "Legally." Legally. That word sliced deeper than any insult could. Because she was right. On paper, it wasn't just mine anymore. On paper, this wasn't technically a property sold without permission. But emotionally, it was the purest form of home betrayal I could imagine. I felt something crack inside me. Not rage, not yet, just a hollow disbelief. "I told you it was temporary," I said quietly. It was, until I realized this could solve both our problems. Both. I had no financial crisis, no debt spiral, no need to liquidate the only asset I had worked years to build. But she did, and somehow my stability had become her solution. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she added. "It's just real estate. We'll split the profit. You can buy something else." Buy something else. Like homes were interchangeable, like memories didn't live in walls, like safety could be replaced with a transaction. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the one room she hadn't started decluttering. I searched the listing websites, and there it was, my apartment. Professional photos, soft lighting, charming two-bedroom with shared ownership flexibility. Shared ownership flexibility. That was how they framed it. My stomach twisted as I read the line. Seller motivated. Seller. Singular. Amanda's name, not mine. This wasn't just family conflict anymore. This was strategic, calculated. She had positioned herself as the primary decision maker. And the worst part? There was already a pending status tag. Someone had made an offer. Someone was preparing to move into my life. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there staring at the screen until the screen blurred. This was it, the moment the truth settled in. My apartment, the symbol of every sacrifice I had made, was on its way to becoming a textbook example of property sold without permission, even if the paperwork technically allowed it. Even if the law might side with her, it didn't change what this was. It was home betrayal, and it was about to get worse, because the next morning I received an email from a title company. Subject line, final closing confirmation, and my name was nowhere on it. The email came at 9:12 a.m. I remember the exact time because I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Subject, final closing confirmation, Hawthorne Drive. My hands were steady, too steady, like my body hadn't caught up to what my brain already knew. I opened it. Dear Miss Morrison, this is confirmation that closing is scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. Funds will be dispersed accordingly. Funds will be dispersed. Not maybe, not pending, will be. The apartment wasn't being considered for sale. It wasn't hypothetical. It was done. A property sold without permission, finalized. And I wasn't even invited to the closing. I called the title company immediately. I'm a co-owner, I said. Why wasn't I included? The woman on the line sounded confused. Ma'am, the transaction documents list Amanda Morrison as the authorized acting seller under joint authority. The sale was initiated under the legal framework signed in your ownership amendment. Ownership amendment. That stupid addendum. The one I skimmed, the one I trusted. There's no fraud flagged? I asked quietly. No, ma'am. All signatures appear valid. Valid. The word echoed like a verdict. This wasn't illegal. It was strategic, and I had walked straight into it. I left work early. When I got home, Amanda was packing kitchen items into boxes. Calm, efficient, humming. You're closing on Friday. She didn't even pretend to be surprised that I knew. Yes. You weren't going to tell me? She taped a box shut. You would have overreacted. Overreacted? My vision blurred for a second. You sold my apartment. Our apartment, she said. You engineered this. She straightened up slowly. Claire, stop acting like this is some dramatic home betrayal. It's a financial decision. We both benefit. I felt something inside me collapse. Not explosively, silently. I was used, I said. Her expression hardened. You signed the papers. There it was, the technicality, the loophole, the clean, polished defense of a property sold without permission, just without understanding, without informed consent, without honesty. Where will I live? I asked. She shrugged. You have savings, you're stable, you'll figure it out. And that's when everything became clear. This wasn't desperation, it wasn't a mistake, it was entitlement. She had looked at my security and decided it was negotiable. She had turned my home into her exit strategy and framed it as a minor family conflict. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. For the first time since this started, I let myself break. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears sliding down silently while I sat on the edge of the bed I might not own in 4 days. 4 days. That's how long it takes for a life to shift. 4 days until strangers would legally own the place I painted, fixed, furnished. 4 days until this home betrayal would become irreversible. And here's the part that hurt the most. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't worried. She believed she had already won. I wiped my face, looked around the room, and for the first time since this started, I stopped feeling like a victim of property sold without permission, and started thinking like someone who had nothing left to lose.
I didn't yell. I didn't threaten lawsuits. I didn't post dramatic messages online about home betrayal or toxic siblings. I went quiet, and Amanda mistook that for defeat. Friday was closing day, but Thursday morning I called in sick, not because I was falling apart, because I was preparing. If there was one thing Amanda had always underestimated about me, it was patience. She relied on charm. I relied on details. And this entire property sold without permission situation existed because I had trusted her explanations instead of reading every line. I wasn't going to make that mistake twice. First call, a real estate attorney. I didn't accuse, I asked questions. Calmly, hypothetically. If a co-owner initiates a sale under joint authority, I said, but can be shown to have misrepresented the intent of ownership restructuring, what happens? There was a pause on the other end. That could constitute fraudulent inducement, he replied carefully, especially if documentation shows misrepresentation of purpose. My heart didn't race this time. It focused. Misrepresentation of purpose. I had texts, emails, voice messages, all stating the ownership adjustment was temporary, for refinancing only, not liquidation, not sale, not permanent transfer of power. Amanda relied on verbal reassurance, but she'd put her convenience in writing. Second call, the title company. This time I requested a full copy of the closing packet, every document, every signature, every disclosure. The woman sounded surprised, but complied. You are still legally a co-owner, she admitted. You're entitled to copies. Entitled. Interesting word. That afternoon, I sat at my dining table, surrounded by half-packed boxes, and read every page of the contract, line by line. And then I found it. A disclosure statement signed solely by Amanda, declaring that no co-owner disputes existed regarding the sale. No co-owner disputes. My lips parted slowly. I had emails sent days earlier clearly stating I did not consent to selling. Documented, time-stamped. That wasn't just a messy family conflict. That was a false declaration. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I emailed the attorney everything, the addendum, the messages, the listing, the disclosure. Subject line, time-sensitive review. Then I waited. Amanda, meanwhile, was glowing. She ordered takeout that night, celebratory. Tomorrow will be such a relief. You'll see, this was the right move. The right move for her. At 8:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. The attorney. I recommend we file an immediate injunction to pause the closing. There's a strong argument that consent was obtained under misrepresented terms. At minimum, the buyer deserves disclosure of dispute. Injunction. Pause the closing. The air in my lungs felt different, lighter. This wasn't about revenge fueled by rage. It was strategy, precision. Amanda had counted on speed, on my emotional shock, on me collapsing under the weight of home betrayal. She hadn't counted on me going silent. She hadn't counted on me understanding that a property sold without permission, even if technically structured, can still unravel under scrutiny. I signed the legal authorization electronically, filed before midnight. Closing was scheduled for 2 p.m. Friday. At 9:03 a.m., the buyer's agent received notification of pending dispute. At 9:11 a.m., Amanda's phone rang. I watched her expression change from confusion to disbelief to fear.
And for the first time since this home betrayal nightmare began, the balance shifted. She looked at me. "What did you do?" I met her eyes calmly. "I read the paperwork." Amanda's face went pale in a way I had never seen before. Not dramatic, not performative. Real. "The buyer is threatening to pull out," she snapped, pacing across the living room. "What did you file?" "An injunction," I said calmly. "There's a dispute on the sale." Her head whipped toward me. "You can't do that." I already did. For the first time since this property sold without permission nightmare began, she wasn't composed. Her phone kept buzzing. Buyer's agent, title company, her realtor, voices overlapping through speakerphone. "Was there a co-owner dispute you failed to disclose? Why wasn't this clarified prior to listing? Are we exposed to liability here?" Liability. The word hung heavy in the room. This wasn't just messy family conflict anymore. This was financial risk, professional risk, reputation risk. And Amanda hated losing face more than she feared losing money. She muted the call and turned to me. "You're ruining everything." "No," I replied quietly. "You did that." Her jaw tightened. "You signed the ownership change. You gave me authority. For refinancing, not liquidation, not a full sale." She exhaled sharply. "It's legal." "Maybe," I said, "but the disclosure you signed states there were no disputes. I have written objections dated before closing." That was the piece she hadn't anticipated. Not my anger, not my tears. Documentation. The attorney called me later that afternoon. "The buyer has formally paused the transaction pending investigation," he said. "There's a strong argument that consent was obtained under misrepresented terms. In other words, the sale was frozen, not dead, but unstable, just like she had left me feeling." That evening, Amanda tried a different tactic. She knocked on my bedroom door, softly. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer at first. Silence unsettled her more than confrontation ever had. Finally, I opened the door. She looked smaller somehow. "This doesn't have to escalate," she said. "We can work this out. 50-50 split, you walk away clean." Walk away clean? From my own apartment? From a home betrayal she engineered? "I don't want a split," I said evenly. "I want my home." Her expression hardened again. "You're being emotional." "No," I replied. "I'm being precise." Here's what Amanda didn't understand. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I wasn't trying to win the family conflict. I was restoring balance. She leveraged speed and secrecy. I leveraged time and transparency. A property sold without permission thrives on silence, on confusion, on someone feeling too overwhelmed to fight back. I wasn't overwhelmed anymore. I was organized. 2 days later, the buyer formally withdrew. They didn't want entanglement, didn't want a potential lawsuit, didn't want drama tied to their investment. The realtor removed the listing. The pending status disappeared. Just like that. The apartment was no longer in escrow. Amanda's relief fund evaporated overnight. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She sat at the kitchen table staring at her phone. For the first time in her life, charm wasn't enough. Manipulation wasn't enough. Technical wording wasn't enough. The property sold without permission narrative had collapsed under scrutiny, and she knew exactly why. She looked up at me. "You've made this very difficult." I held her gaze. "No," I said softly, "I made it visible." And visibility was something she had never planned for. The listing was gone. The buyer was gone. But the consequences were just beginning. Amanda thought the worst part was losing the sale. It wasn't. The real damage came from the paper trail. When the buyer withdrew, they didn't leave quietly. Their attorney sent a formal inquiry to the brokerage regarding non-disclosure of an ownership dispute. Not a lawsuit, not yet, but enough to trigger an internal review. The realtor called Amanda the next morning. I could hear the tension through the thin kitchen wall. "You assured us there were no co-owner objections," he said. "We need clarification, immediately." Clarification? That was the polite word for accountability. Amanda had built this entire plan on one assumption, that I would accept the home betrayal as a painful lesson and move on, that I wouldn't question the paperwork, that I wouldn't involve professionals. But once the term property sold without permission entered a legal conversation, even informally, things changed. Brokerages care about liability, title companies care about documentation, buyers care about clean ownership, and Amanda had introduced risk into all three. 2 weeks later, she received a notice. The brokerage was suspending their working relationship with her until the matter was reviewed, not because she broke the law, but because she misrepresented the situation. In real estate, reputation is currency, and hers had just devalued. At home, the atmosphere shifted. No more humming while packing, no more celebratory takeout, just silence, heavy, unavoidable. She started spending more time out of the apartment, more time on the phone. Damage control. I didn't interfere, I didn't gloat. This wasn't explosive revenge. It was natural consequence. Karma doesn't need drama, it just needs truth. One evening, she finally said it. "You could have just talked to me." I looked up from my laptop slowly. I did. "You escalated. You initiated." She didn't argue because she couldn't. Here's the part people don't talk about in stories of family conflict. Sometimes the karma isn't loud, it's quiet erosion, trust dissolving, opportunities shrinking, doors closing gently but firmly. Amanda had leveraged my stability to solve her instability. Now she had neither. The sale money she counted on was gone, her professional connections were strained, and most importantly, I wasn't under her influence anymore. I filed formal paperwork to dissolve the joint ownership agreement, cleanly, legally, with oversight. The attorney structured it so that she could voluntarily relinquish her share in exchange for a small settlement, far less than she would have gained from the sale, but enough to avoid further exposure. She signed, not because she wanted to, but because continuing the dispute would only highlight the original property sold without permission attempt, and she couldn't afford more visibility. The day her name was officially removed from the title, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Air, space, ownership, not just of the apartment, but of myself. The home betrayal had forced me into a version of myself that was sharper, stronger, less trusting, but more aware. Amanda moved out quietly a week later. No dramatic goodbye, no apology, just a short text. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "I'm at peace." And that was the difference. The apartment feels different now. Same walls, same floors, same soft creak in the hallway at night, but quieter, cleaner, not because Amanda is gone, because the tension is gone. For months, this place didn't feel like home. It felt like evidence, like the center of a family conflict that never should have existed. Now it feels like mine again, fully, legally, emotionally. People assume stories about a property sold without permission end with fireworks, courtroom drama, public humiliation, explosive revenge. But that's not what happened. There was no shouting match in a parking lot, no viral social media exposure, no final speech about betrayal. There was paperwork, patience, boundaries, and consequences. That's it. Amanda and I don't talk much now. We exchange short holiday messages, neutral, polite. There's no dramatic hatred between us, just distance. And honestly, distance is healthier than pretending the home betrayal never happened. I don't wish her harm, I don't replay the anger, but I also don't ignore what she showed me. Trust without clarity is risk, and family doesn't cancel out accountability. The hardest part wasn't stopping the sale, it wasn't filing the injunction, it wasn't even confronting her. The hardest part was accepting that someone I loved was capable of turning my stability into leverage. That's what made the property sold without permission situation cut so deeply. It wasn't about real estate, it was about consent, about respect, about whether my security mattered. I've learned something I wish someone had told me years ago. You can be kind without being careless. You can support someone without surrendering your foundation. And you can walk away from a family conflict without becoming the villain in someone else's story. Amanda probably tells this differently. Maybe I'm the cold sister who ruined her fresh start. Maybe she still believes it was just a business decision that spiraled. But here's what I know. If I had stayed silent, if I had doubted myself a little longer, if I had avoided confrontation to keep the peace, my apartment would be gone, my savings tied up in a rushed purchase somewhere else, and the lesson would have been much more expensive. The phrase home betrayal sounds dramatic until it's yours, until you realize your safety can be repackaged as someone else's opportunity, until you see how quickly temporary paperwork becomes permanent damage. But here's the thing about a property sold without permission. It only succeeds if the other person stays small, stays confused, stays afraid to question. The moment you step into clarity, the structure starts to shake. I still sit on my balcony some evenings, watching the sky turn pink over the neighborhood. And sometimes I think about how close I came to losing this place, not because of strangers, because of trust. If you were in my position and discovered your own sister had set up a property sold without permission, would you have fought quietly like I did, or would you have walked away? I'm curious, because sometimes the loudest revenge is simply refusing to let someone rewrite your life.